Hi there, it's Gabrielle Nicolay with SpeechKids, where we teach little kids to talk and help parents understand their little kids. And today I am so excited to talk to Sarah Wayland. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Gabrielle. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to let Sarah tell you about what she does because she has created a niche for herself that defies description. So, Sarah, who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Sarah Wayland. I have a company I founded in 2013 called Guiding Exceptional Parents. And the company is mostly, what I do is I work with parents, as you might guess from the name, with kids who are exceptional. And sometimes that means gifted, sometimes that means various learning challenges, usually invisible disabilities of a variety of kinds, and helping the parents to help their kids. So I do this in 3 different ways. One way is that it's just straight up parent coaching. Like I actually teach a class here in the Washington, D.C. metro area called the Parent-Child Journey Individualized Approach to Raising Your Challenging Child, which was developed and created by Dan Shapiro. And I teach a section of that class in my part of the D.C. region. And that's a 10-session class, and it comes with a book. And sometimes families like me to take that and individualize it for their exact family. And that's always very interesting work because, you know, every family has their own unique challenges. And it's not just the child who has their unique challenges, but parents have their own challenges. And so I work with them. I always tell a joke on myself, which is that when I took this class, so my husband and I took that class with Dr. Shapiro ages ago, and we got to the section on rewards and motivation, and it was spectacularly unhelpful for our kids, like just spectacularly unhelpful. And it was partly because I am not consistent enough to implement a good reward scheme. I'm just not. And so just acknowledging that, you know, whatever it's going to be, it has to be something I can deliver in the moment at the point of performance. Anything that requires planning and filling a chart out and all that is just not going to happen in my house. And so acknowledging that fact about me then allowed me to develop a plan for my kids that actually worked for them. So that's just an example of, you know, a customization.
Yeah. Which is so interesting, right? Because we talk all about sort of tailoring the situation to meet the child's needs. And what you're saying is actually this is a two-way street, which if we think about it for a second, we know. But let's also make the parent feel successful.
Right.
Make sure everybody feels good.
Yes. Well, and I knew the reward things didn't work for me. It took me taking that class to realize why it wasn't working. And you know, there's no judgment there. Like that's just how I am. And so, you know, instead of beating myself up about the fact that I'm not implementing things, you know, with fidelity, like let's figure out a plan that will work for me to implement with fidelity, given who I am and my personality, and my own strengths and weaknesses. So that's one part of what I do. The second part is something called relationship development intervention. That is an intervention that's specifically designed for kids on the autism spectrum. And that is, again, a model that is involved in helping the parents understand who their kids are. And then, you know, based on who their kids are, we work to restore what we call the guiding relationship. Because very often kids with autism, for a host of reasons, communicate how they're feeling about things and so on in ways that a lot of parents don't quite know how to interpret what they're seeing. And so if you can just help them understand what their child is trying to tell them, then they can respond in appropriate ways and then coach their child towards, you know, restoring some of the missing developmental stages that they did not go through because of, you know, whatever was going on for that kid at the time when developmentally that skill should have been coming online. So that's relationship development intervention, again, another parent coaching model. And then the last thing I do is something called special needs care navigation. And what that is it is working with families to figure out what kinds of supports they need to get in place for their individual child. So very often, people will come to me after I teach my class and they'll be like, so, and the last session of that class is, okay, you've tried all these great strategies and things are still not going the way you had hoped. Like, what might be going on and who can help you? And so I'll get through that class and then people will come to me after that class and they'll be like, so definitely having a problem with this challenge here. And so, maybe they need an occupational therapist or a speech language therapist or, a psychologist, or, maybe they need ABA, like whatever they need. Like, yeah. So what we'll do is we'll work with them. Sometimes the school system is not supporting the child the way they need to be supported. But what I do is put together kind of a comprehensive, here's all the things you can put in place. And sometimes, again, you have to deal with the system you have. So, and just as an example, my older son, I always say my younger son is a very effective self-advocate, but my older son is super calm and super compliant. And so people always thought he was doing fine when he really wasn't doing fine. Mm-hmm. He would just kind of check out. That was his strategy. And which is a great strategy if you're a teacher and you don't want someone disrupting your class, but it's not a great strategy if you're the child and you don't understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. And don't ask for help for it. So anyway, one of the things that we couldn't get for him was supports in school. We knew he needed speech therapy, for example. And the school system said, well, even though when we had him formally tested, he was like below the first percentile in language scores, which is pretty bad. But because he is very smart and he could actually read before he could talk, then we could put, he could figure his way through the situation. And right. So he looked pretty functional. So no educational impact. But we had a fabulous private speech language therapist who worked with him for his whole life, basically from the ages of 5 through the age of 19 when he graduated from high school. Mm-hmm. And so, she was a lifesaver. And if we hadn't had that private support in place, he wouldn't have gotten the interventions he needed. Mm-hmm. So, thinking about what you can get, and if it's not working to get it through the school, how can you get it through your private insurance? Maybe you need both, depending on the kid. So just thinking about how to put all those various supports in place, your training, your own personal training, things like that. So.
And that's super important for families. I mean, one of the conversations we always have with people who are contacting us for the first time is to educate them about the options, right? And yeah. We have our whole sort of spiel that we give them about publicly available services, insurance-based, private, all of the things. And so it sounds like you are somebody that parents can come to when they sort of have all this stuff and they say, well, we're supposed to have this, but it's not working, or yeah, we didn't get what we thought. What else can we do?
Exactly.
Now, do you work with school systems or only with families?
So my work is with families, but sometimes, if school isn't working for your kid, very often we do have to address the school-based issues. Mm-hmm. So if I'm working with a family and I realize that a child is really struggling in school, I'm going to work with them to figure out how to get supports in place at the school. But my focus is on the family. So I definitely do enjoy working with school teams. And in fact, some of my work, I mentioned relationship development intervention. I'm actually doing training for teachers here in Prince George's County, where we go in and teach them the principles of RDI to use in the classroom. So we just finished a big training program for a school here for kids with significant disabilities. It's called a regional school. And we trained, I think we had 8 teachers at that program and the principal, and they all went through this RDI training so that they could use it in the classroom. So I love working with teachers because, they have a huge impact on the child's life. And so I do love working with them, but in a collaborative sense. And, something I always tell my families is that, I'm great at collaborating with a school team, but if things have gotten a little contentious, I am not a good person for you. So, but I do have people I can refer out to. So I have a lot of wonderful colleagues who are really good at, making sure the right thing happens. I know the law, I know how to get the supports in place, I know what you need to do to document and all that, but like I said, I prefer a collaborative relationship. So if it's not like that, then there are people who will serve you better.
And you have a really, really, because of the work you do, you have a really robust referral network.
I have an incredibly robust referral network, yeah. And I did want to say that special needs care navigation piece, the reason I do that, and it's a term I actually invented for myself, because I really couldn't find anybody who wanted that. And as you might have heard earlier, I mentioned that both my kids have their own challenges. And when they were little, we wanted somebody who could provide that sort of comprehensive view. And the problem we found is that there were educational consultants who could help us with the school piece. There were, psychiatrists who could help us with the medication piece. There were therapists who could help us with, helping our kids learn to self-regulate. There were, speech language therapists, occupational therapists. Like, we had all these wonderful people, but they each had their own window into the system. And we really needed somebody who was us, which is what does end up happening, right? Is because you know your child better than anybody as a parent. But, initially, to ask a parent to know what all those things are is really difficult. And we really wanted somebody like that. And we were lucky enough to have Dan Shapiro as our developmental pediatrician, and he definitely provided that for us. But not everybody has somebody like that on their team. And so I wanted to provide that service for parents where I could start with a good assessment so they could figure out exactly what their child is dealing with and then put those supports in place.
So when families come to you for the say it again, special needs care consulting,
care navigation.
Care navigation. Sorry, yeah. See, I'm getting it wrong. What's the process? How do they find you? And then what happens? They call you and they say, "I need help." So now what happens?
So I don't know how they find me. I don't know. I'm on social media. I have, friends and clients who recommend me. I mean, it's mostly through people who know me, and maybe they stumble across me on social media. I do, actually, I forgot to mention this, but I run some parenting summits online with my friend Penny Williams.
And we will put a link to that in the notes for the show, because that's a great resource, and it's free.
It's free, that's right. And we're going to be running it again in mid to late October this year. So we're already getting our speakers together and getting the recordings done. So that's very exciting. And I do really, I always say it's the best professional training I could get to talk to all these fabulous people. So, but you asked what the process was like. So like I said, I have no idea how they find me, but they do. And so then they schedule an appointment. My first appointment is usually an hour and a half, and I get all the records they have on their kids. So things like, report cards, or if they've had any testing done, Neuropsych Evaluation or psychoeducational evaluation, any IEP, any paperwork that can help me understand their child. Very often people come to me and they're just like, help. And so, sometimes just report cards can be helpful, and talking to any teachers that have been working with the kid, or, if there have been therapists working with them, then talking to the therapist. And so I'll, coordinate with all the other people involved with the child's life, and review the paperwork, read through everything, and then talk to the professionals. And then I'll meet with the family for an hour and a half, and they tell me like what brought them here, right? Like what made them decide that they needed additional help beyond what they were getting. And so very often there's a story there. And so they tell me, what's happened with their kid through up to the current time, but usually starting early. A lot of these things are obvious to parents early on. Sometimes they're not, though. Sometimes they come up after the child enters school or something like that. So I'll listen to the story and I'll ask questions, and if they haven't gotten an evaluation, very often the first step is just go get a good neuropsych evaluation. And I always say a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation, because you really want, there's a thing called a psychoeducational evaluation, which really focuses on the academic piece. But it doesn't get at some of the other core challenges that can make it hard for a kid. So things like anxiety disorder, or schools will diagnose those kinds of things sometimes in the course of doing a psychoeducational evaluation, but I do find the presentation focuses more broadly on the child's functioning.
And it's maybe not as sensitive as it needs to be in a psychoeducational versus a full neuropsych, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that's hard about a neuropsych, though, is a lot of people think that's going to be the answer. Right? So they get the neuropsych, and very often what will happen is the neuropsychologist will come back and say, yeah, there's some language issues here. You really need to get a comprehensive evaluation by a speech language therapist. And so, it's a starting point. Now, I will say that the neuropsych evaluation is so helpful. It really can serve as a roadmap. Yeah. And my older son, we had him initially evaluated when he was 5 years old, and he's now 22. And when he was getting ready to go off to college, I was pulling together all his records to try to, put together the story of my son. And I was reading through that evaluation from when he was 5, and it still applies. Wow. It was, he's done incredible work. So I mentioned he was below the first percentile for language. He's now in the 75th percentile for language because of the good work of speech language pathologists who I love. And so intervention really does help. And but there were recommendations she made in there, and I was like, oh, I should have followed through on that.
I like that. 20 years ago. Highlight.
Yeah, exactly. Note to self: follow directions as written.
Can I press pause for just a second? How old do you need to be to have a complete neuropsychological evaluation?
So it's a really good question. So kids can be evaluated younger than 5. Most of the tests and assessments are normed for kids who are 5 and older. That's not necessarily true when you get into speech language issues. So that's for the comprehensive neuropsych evaluation. However, there are people who will look at kids who are younger than that. You just have to find somebody who's willing to work with those younger kids. But many people will tell you to wait until the child is 5. But I will tell you that, there are signs, and you know this because you work with the littles. But there are things that you can see earlier on that are big red flags, and the faster you address them, the better off your kid is going to be. So the earlier you can get in and do that. But it's very hard to get, a normed assessment younger than 5, despite the fact that the earlier the intervention, the better. So it's
that is such a quandary, right? I mean, and sometimes I know this is true for myself. I because of the young age of the child, I'll take them for therapy and sort of not avoid, but postpone any kind of diagnosis because I can treat what I see. Yes. And then we might wait till 5. And so I think the tension is kind of right in that, like, we think of, we have to do evaluation and then we treat. It's not always the case.
And especially
for the young ones.
Yes. And especially, even for the older ones, I will say, because usually it's pretty clear what's going on there. And the fact of the matter is, if a child can't express themselves, like, get them to a speech language pathologist, because the fact of the matter is the neuropsych, it may reveal that it's a motor issue, or it may reveal that it's, a word finding problem, or, whatever. But very often there's a long delay between when you book the appointment and when the report is ready. And it's very often, several months. And so again, time's wasting. So you may as well get in. If you know the kid has some kind of language issue, like get help for that. Yeah. And then you can also, so just as an example, my older son, whose language skills were so bad, one of the reasons his language skills are so bad is that he had trouble regulating his attention appropriately. And so the Neuropsych Evaluation revealed that he had ADHD. And so he needed help with the ADHD. Once we could help him with that, then he was able to access the speech language therapy more effectively. So it's important, even though they're having an issue in a certain area, to get intervention, but it's also important to get assessment when it's a reasonable time to do that.
Yep.
But yeah, I agree with you completely. If you see your kid is having trouble with fine motor skills, like get them to an OT,
Yeah.
So.
This evaluation question I find really interesting because, again, what I just said in terms of like functional diagnosis versus, a number that we code somebody with.
Yeah.
So there's that piece of things, but also, and my daughter, we got her a neuropsych when she was in, gosh, I don't remember, 4th or 5th grade, because we noticed, it was like schoolwork was slipping a little, or, like it seemed harder for her to do certain things. And so we got the neuropsych as a way of understanding how her brain was functioning, right? So you alluded to this earlier, like it's kind of like a brain map.
Yeah.
And then sort of where the roadblocks are and where the superhighways are, and you can sort of work off of that. Well, the end result of her neuropsych was there's nothing to do. Here's where the it should be a 5-lane highway and it's a 4-lane highway. So
right.
Big deal. Just understand that this is what's happening.
Right.
And so she's had no intervention. And then we're going to revisit that when she's maybe a sophomore or junior in high school, because that's another time when, the workload increases. But having that blueprint was like super helpful because nobody's stressed out. Like we're like, oh, right. That's how your brain works. Okay.
Right. That's such a great point. And I mean, I'll just give you an example from my older son. He has a condition called developmental coordination disorder, or dyspraxia. And his speech is okay, like the motor functioning is okay, but large motor movements are hard for him. It's dyspraxia and DCD are often called clumsy child syndrome, and he's definitely a little clumsy. But what I realized when he got one of the tests he got is that I can show him, like I'm doing this for swimming, okay? So teaching him to swim, I would say, okay, you need to lift your arm up and over for freestyle, so I was trying to show this to him. He couldn't make sense of that at all. And so I had to move his arm through that motion. And once I knew that, he learned to swim like that. But prior to that, we kept trying to teach him to swim, and we would show him how to do it. And he would just be like, you could see he was trying. He just didn't know what to do with the information. But actually moving his, body through those sequences was what he needed to learn to do that. And so, so it went from being not frustrating from being very frustrating and wondering, like, is he ever going to learn to swim, to, this is how we help him.
And it could have been easily, and this is where, again, testing and treatment come in, which is, it could have just been, he's never going to learn to swim.
Correct. That's correct.
And then that sets up a whole, and then we can get into the whole RDI piece, but right, that sets up a whole dynamic where child feels like a failure, parent feels like a failure. Yes. And then there's this unspoken sort of resentment that's getting in the way of further adventures in life, right? Because you're like, oh, I can't do that. So now I have a can't do attitude.
Yes.
Whereas literally a touch and a movement erase even the possibility that blockage, the resentment, the rupture in the relationship,
right,
it just removed that completely.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples of this, and this is something we teach a lot of families, and I know you know this one, but is slowing down. So, some kids, one of the things I always say, and you talked about a 4-lane highway versus a 5-lane highway, that's actually the exact metaphor I use for neural development, where, when something is, when you're learning a new skill, I always say it's like, whacking your way through the forest with a machete, and like it just takes a long time to get from point A to point B. And as you travel that path more often, it clears out and it gets easier and easier to travel there. And so you develop the 5-lane highway. But the kid has to do the work to develop that pathway. You can't do it for them. They have to do that hard work themselves. And so what you want to do is you want to set it up so they have the tools, the machete, and it's not too hard. So if it's giant trees that are right next to each other, a machete isn't going to help you. But if it's bamboo or something like that, you can cut through the path, but you have to give them the tools they need, and you have to make the challenge just right and not too hard. And so, but whacking your way through that forest takes time. And a lot of us as parents are so busy. The world is so fast paced. And
Except
so
during a pandemic. But anyway,
where it's oddly fast paced and not at the very same time. Yeah, exactly. And so if you as a parent can just step back and give your child that time to process and to figure their way through what they need to do whatever you're asking them, then very often just giving them that time will help them. And that is one of the biggest challenges in our busy, fast-paced society. Just slowing down and giving our kids time to do what they need to do to learn.
Yeah. And it sounds like when parents come to you and when families come to you, that they get a whole bunch of tools like that one to help make their lives easier, to help their children develop more skills, to help the parents develop more skills. It sounds like they're getting a whole suite of a whole toolbox, not just one tool.
Yes, and one of the things you said earlier I think is really important, which is that when you understand what's going on for your child, it makes it easier for you as a parent to figure out what to do. So my younger son, for example, does have something that's called slow processing speed. Now, for some kids, that just means they have trouble writing quickly, for example. But in his case, it actually means he just needs extra time, and he always will need extra time to process that. He's very thoughtful, and he wants to be very precise about things. And so it takes him a while to organize his thoughts. And me pressing him to go faster than he can go doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So, I have learned as a parent to just, when I see that he needs the time, I just back off and let him take that time, because in the end, it's going to go faster if I do that. But you're right about the tools. I mean, there's so many tools out there. I talked about, reward systems, for example. So for a particularly odious task, sometimes kids are going to need a little extra to get through that really horrible, hard thing. And so we want to help them through that if we think it's important for them. Mostly I'm a fan of letting the kid discover for themselves how important it is, and being motivated to do it for themselves. But there are some tasks like, kids with sensory issues, for example, might have trouble taking a shower or something like that. And so how are we going to get through that process of helping them take a shower or a bath in a way that respects the fact that, it might be very difficult for them to do that. So
it's parenting is like this anyway. And then parenting a child who has some special needs is even more so, where it's this constant battle of, number one, what I expected and what I'm getting. So that's the first big thing that's very different when people have children with special needs, I think.
Super hard, yeah.
There's that whole grieving process that happens. But then there's also what did I think was non-negotiable that is now, I realize, completely negotiable and or unnecessary.
Right.
And showers don't happen to be one of them, but maybe it's, we take a bath every night. Well, guess what? That doesn't work for my family. Am I willing to change that? Am I able to change that? Because my child might need me to change that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And then that's just like an incredible, well, first of all, it's a huge journey as a parent, right? Because then that's on you. And you talked about this earlier, like sometimes it's the parent who needs to make the change, not the child.
Very often. Well, one of the things that I like to tell my parents is really the only person you can change is yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And so, so that's the one person you have control over is yourself. And actually, when I teach that parenting class, I have a slide in it, which is you have no control over your child, which is a tough sell for a lot of parents.
A lot of parents, our entire child rearing system is based on control.
That's
and
correct.
That's like a whole other conversation, but
yeah, but it doesn't work. I mean, in the end, your kid decides to do something because they think they need to do it for some reason. Now, maybe it's because they're afraid that you're gonna, swat their behind or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or it might be that they realize, not stinking is something that actually like makes other kids want to be around me. Mm-hmm. And so, I guess I'll go ahead and do that thing that even though I hate it, it means I can have friends. So it's worth it to me. Yeah. But it's not there. Your child in the end is making that decision to do the thing, whatever it is. And there are lots of ways you can motivate them to think about, why they want to do it or how they're going to do it. But in the end, it's up to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we're going to pin it there. This was so much fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for initiating the conversation.
I loved having you. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.